We are putting one final bow on the 2024 college football season tonight as we dive into some hot takes and lessons learned from these past 5 months. Before that, we'll dive into a little coaching movement that is taking place in the Big Ten, what that means for the teams involved. This is Always Talking Ball. Tyler Noe, Lance Barton, and we are super excited to be joined by one of the co-hosts of the 3 Tech Pod, Mitch Mason. Mitch, how we doing tonight?
Hey guys, I'm doing well. Glad to be with you.
Good deal. Good deal. Hey, before we dive in, let the people know where they can find the 3 Tech Pod, because honestly, man, when we started doing this, I found you guys, and you guys put out some really good stuff on socials, obviously, on Apple and Spotify, but let everybody know where they can find you.
Yeah, real simple at 3 Tech Pod. We just wrapped up year 3 of the show, so year 4 will kick off later on this week, actually. And yeah, man, we've got really big plans. We've been super fortunate to talk ball. It's just 3 best friends who met in college, talking college football, the pros and the cons, and the ups and the downs. But at 3 Tech Pod is where you can find us on all the platforms.
Awesome, man.
You know, I want to jump in here real quick, Tyler. Like, we ask you guys all the time to please subscribe, follow, and all of our socials and on YouTube. Please do the same here for 3 Tech Pod. Again, we wouldn't have Mitch or any of the boys on from 3 Tech if we didn't think they were absolute ball knowers, and they most certainly are. Great show to check out. So, yeah, give them a check out on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, all the same platforms that you can find us on. Follow them on X, Instagram. Give them a listen. Check them out. They're a great follow for sure.
Appreciate that. Pressure's on now. I've got quite the billing to live up to here.
Yeah, got to perform.
That's right.
All right, but before we get into the 2024 wrap up, we got to talk about Jim Knowles. We got to talk about him making the jump from the national championship winning Ohio State Buckeyes to, I guess you could call, Ohio State fans wouldn't call Penn State a rival, but the other way around would definitely suffice. He takes a 3-year, $9.3 million deal to be defensive coordinator. $3.1 million a year, which is, from what I've read, more than most, if not all, G5 head coaches. It's just an insane amount of money. Basically, my question is Jim Knowles worth it? Mitch, we'll start with you.
Boy, I think he is. I've been one of his loudest supporters, I feel like, at least in our circles. When he left Oklahoma State to go to Ohio State, I was devastated for the Pokes. I was thrilled for the Buckeyes. And, he's got a reputation maybe as a little bit of a riverboat gambler with the number of blitzes that he brings and the kind of funkiness that he brings. But, then again, you watch the NFL and Steve Spagnuolo is doing the exact same thing and winning championships, right? And so for me, Spagnuolo and Knowles are kind of birds of a feather. I think this is a great hire for Penn State. I do think this absolutely puts James Franklin on the clock, though, to win a national championship. If you're going to pay for the best, if you're going to go out and get the best, then you had better deliver. And, defense has not been Penn State's real issue. Sure, in the biggest moments, maybe they've been run over by an Ohio State or by a Michigan. But by and large, it's been their offense has kind of disappeared in those big games. They haven't been able to keep up. So Knowles is going to take care of the defensive side of the ball. You look at what he did at Ohio State. He had them third last year, first overall in total defense this season. His results speak for themselves. So I think it's a home run hire on the defensive side of the ball, but now it really just shines the spotlight for me on the offensive side for Franklin.
Yeah, Mitch, Lance, how does the reaction from Ohio State Nation, what does that say to you? I mean, we obviously, you put out a video yesterday on the socials. We got a lot of comments from Ohio State fans trying to downplay it. Obviously, reports came out today, talking about, and there's been a lot of reports, but one came out today where, they were talking about how they asked Jim Knowles not to come to the championship celebration while he was trying to figure out what was going on in his personal life and what he was going to do. So
wasn't that Brett
give me the Ohio State perspective.
Yeah, wasn't that Brett McMurphy that reported that today?
Yeah.
Honestly, I wished I could say I was shocked, but I really wasn't. I really wasn't surprised of obviously with the Ohio State program. You're talking about arguably the most successful program in college football, like as far as longevity across the history of the sport. I mean, it doesn't really matter who's coached there. They're always one of the best programs, if not the best, in college football. Just their fan base, obviously, is pretty spoiled. And that's saying a lot here coming from an Alabama fan, I know. But the comments were incredible. Mitch, we had a few hundred comments between the post that we put out on Instagram and TikTok and talking about it on X. And the majority were just like, that's fine. He can leave. He wasn't
acting
that
like
good
he
anyway.
acting like he wasn't worth anything. Like he
Right.
didn't do anything while he was there.
Yeah, he wasn't that good anyway. Honestly, the majority, like, I'm not talking about 3 or 4. It was like they all got together and said, "Let's all go comment the same thing and say the same stuff." Like maybe they all listened to the same Ohio State show and they heard this somewhere. I don't know, but they were all talking about how it took 3 years for him to implement his defense at Ohio State for them to finally be any good. And the only reason they were any good was because of all of these elite players and elite playmakers that they had this year on defense. And it's one of those things that I've said a lot this year. I just think that two things can be true at the same time. Yes, Ohio State did have elite talent. They had great talent this year. But to knock Jim Knowles and to act like that he's not an incredible defensive coordinator and that he didn't do an elite job at Ohio State is just, to be honest with you, I just think that's a bunch of fans being butthurt that he's going to Penn State. I mean, you alluded to it just a minute ago, Mitch. When he was at Oklahoma State, they had a top 10 defenses last year there in 2021, and they tied the school record that year for the most wins in Oklahoma State's program history for winning 12 games that year. Ohio State in that same season was ranked somewhere in the 30s in scoring defense. Jim Knowles' first year, they were 17th. His second year, they were, one publication I saw had it second. The other ones had him as third overall in the country in scoring defense. And this past year, they were number 1. So obviously that's progression, and that's a pretty significant improvement in his time there. So it was interesting to see the folks in Columbus and Ohio State fans just honestly not very grateful for the time that Jim Knowles spent there.
I raised my eyebrows when I saw the comments on your video because you guys put out great social content and get a lot of comments, but when I saw the number, I was like, that seems high and it had just gone out too. Yeah. It was pretty quick that groupthink kind of took over in the comments. Total defense, to your point, Lance, the 4 years previous to Knowles taking over, 59th, 1st, 71st. So yes, Ohio State has fielded great defenses before Jim Knowles. Obviously, that's not the issue here. I think what Ohio State fans have just failed to realize over the last 3 years is like sacks have not been the end-all be-all. That's the number one thing that I've seen when people are complaining about Jim Knowles as well. They're not getting to the quarterback, right? They're in the backfield, they're getting pressure, but they're not actually getting to the quarterback. But I don't understand how you see the scoring defense continue to progress each year that he's there and not think, well, maybe sack isn't an end-all be-all, right? QB pressures oftentimes can be just as good, if not more beneficial than sacks, especially if you're forcing turnovers, right? So I don't understand, quite frankly, the camp that's saying, we're fine, be gone, we'll pick up right where we left off, because that is just not the case historically, statistically, or otherwise.
Yeah, I don't disagree.
Yeah, and I just think, like, you look at the identity of Ohio State before Jim Knowles came there, and it was a team who kind of, you thought had to win shootouts. You thought had to win, games high scoring with their offense. Obviously, the quarterbacks they've had, Justin Fields and C.J. Stroud, and those guys, and you just kind of looked at them, and he's helping change the identity of that team with their physicality and allowing 12 points per game and his defense wasn't the issue in that Michigan game, right? They allowed 13 points. So it's just it's a testament to what he's done there, what he did at Oklahoma State. Happy for the guy. He got rewarded. He gets to go back home kind of, to Philly. Yeah, like you said, Mitch, big hire by James Franklin. I personally think they could have spent some of that money on wide receivers. But, like you said, defense has never really been the issue. Big Penn State was number 6, number 7, somewhere around there as far as total defense this year. So, again, it shores it up though. And, they like you said, they have no grounds to not try to expand on what they did this year, making it to the semifinals. So the pressure is definitely on James Franklin, probably for having one of, if not the best offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator in college football. So,
yep.
All right. Let's put a bow on the 2024 college football season. I think the 2024 season is going to be remembered for a couple of things. To me, it was a very transitory year, right? Obviously, we transitioned from 4 teams to 12 teams in the playoffs. I just think the way also that we now view teams has changed. And we said it multiple times during the season. It's no longer about you don't have to have 0 or 1 loss, right? You got to get used to looking at a team and seeing 2 or 3 losses and looking at their schedule and saying, okay, this team is actually still legit. You used to just be trained in your mind, even with 4 teams, you got to have 0 or 1 losses or you're not making the playoff and you're not winning the national championship. So that's one big takeaway for me as far as the 2024 season. Lance, what's kind of, some of the takeaways for you? And then we'll jump into kind of, some of the things we learned and, a couple of hot takes here and there.
Yeah, well, I definitely think that, I'm going to first start with the 12-team playoff. That was obviously the thing that kind of dominated the, conversation across the sport for the majority of the year. And again, a lot of people talked about that it was going to create more of an opportunity for the little guy to win a national championship. And, we've said this kind of in the past and a couple of other shows too that we were guests on, but I'm just going to say it again. And that we talked about it before the year that we felt like that it was what it was going to do was to give the teams with the most talent and the best teams in the country more mulligans, more chances for a crack at it to go play for a national championship. That's exactly what happened this year. Just imagine if we had a 4-team playoff still and Ohio State loses that game to Michigan and then they're eliminated from playoff contention, which is obviously what would have happened if we had a 4-team playoff. But instead, they still got in as the 8th seed? Mm-hmm. The 8th seed and then in the 12-team playoff, and then they go on a run with the most talented team in college football. They go on a run and end up winning it all. And I know we're just speculating here, but like in the past, you saw teams like Georgia last year with Lab McConkey and Brock Bowers, like they were kind of banged up throughout the year, and they were banged up in that SEC championship game against Alabama. If they had a month off to be pretty much healthy to get into a 12-team playoff, you could possibly say that they could have went on a run and win a national championship. Alabama was a 5 seed a few years ago with Bryce Young. They were the first team out of the 4-team playoff. Bryce Young, Will Anderson, that Alabama team that absolutely spanked Kansas State in the Sugar Bowl. If they could have gotten the 12-team playoff and possibly gone on a run. Ohio State was Zeke Elliott and that bunch after they won the national championship that following year. I think that was 2015. So I'm just wondering now within this 12-team playoff, we're going to see more of this going forward. It's only 1 year. It's hard to form a huge hypothesis or whatever after 1 year of a 12-team playoff. But that was something that we talked about quite a bit leading into this, and it literally happened in year 1.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the hot takes I had written down was the G5, and I'm not knocking on the G5. It's always fun to root for the little guy, to root for the David. But to me, after 1 year at least, and kind of looking at the landscape of the playoff and how we saw teams run through it, what paths they had to take, it's a participation trophy to me. It's a G5 participation trophy, and I think it was and is probably going to be in the future dumb. And we want to see the best teams get in the playoff, and we can get into the rankings too of how the committee ranked Boise State and all that, and that was a different conversation. But I just think it's going to be really, really tough for a G5 team to run through 3 or 4 games like that. I mean, they can win one. Yeah, like Lance mentioned, a Boise or against Oklahoma, but to run through a path week after week like that, it's going to be tough.
Yeah. I think the thing that we found ourselves really fighting for, it seems very similar to you guys, where we were excited about the G5 getting a chance, right? Not because we expected them to go win or to do anything notable, but because it expanded the field to, as Garrett has said multiple times on our show, it ensures that the best team in the country plays for a national champion, right? You don't have the Georgias, you don't have Alabama getting left out thanks to a committee that happened to value one team's win over, the 5 seed. You don't have a Florida State that, God love Jordan Travis. I hate that he got hurt against Northern Alabama. But Florida State should not have been left out of that playoff, right? There was nothing that they could do to avoid that. So by expanding the field, we avoid anything to that extreme degree happening, right? Will a 12 seed as a group of 5 team ever win a national championship? Probably not. Although the talent disparity and the parity in our sport does seem to be growing a little bit with the transfer portal. So that's fun. But overall, the pros of having more fan bases locked in later in the season than ever before, that created an experience for me. Yes, I have a team that was in the fight sort of until the last week of the season.
No, they definitely were.
But just as a fan of college football, it was fun to look around and see the Armies and the Boise States and the Tulanes excited and dreaming about going to the Sugar Bowl.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that at all, Mitch. I mean, I think that like your Arizona States, for example, Boise, SMU, what this season did, like them making the 12-team playoff and them being in the thick of it in the running at the end to get into the 12-team playoff. Again, I don't think any of those teams had any chance to actually win the national championship this year, but it created a ton of interest and funding and NIL money from boosters, and like their football programs are on a huge trajectory upward because of what they just did this year of actually making it to a 12-team playoff. And to your point, if we'd have had a 14 playoff, none of that would have ever happened. And I mean, we actually did this last year, and I'm sure you guys probably did something similar, Mitch, but like we were sitting there like, I think it was when the calendar flipped to November last year. Not this past season, but last year, there was like 8 teams that still had a legit chance to make a 14 playoff. So that's so many fan bases. That's 100-something fan bases that literally have no chance of watching their team go to compete for a playoff to go compete for a championship. And in this year, we looked at it when the calendar flipped to November. I mean, Tyler was releasing this graphic every week of teams that that were actually still in the mix. And I think it was like 30-something teams in November that technically were still 100% alive for a playoff spot, whether that be an automatic bid for a conference championship deal or whether that be an at-large bid. So it was, no doubt about it, it created a lot more fan interest just across the entire landscape of the sport.
It felt like we were all playing the same sport late in the season. And I know that technically, right, the G5 is normally playing a much different level of football than the upper echelon, right? Unless Appalachian State walks into Kyle Field and upsets my Aggies with me there in attendance. That one sucked. But most of the time, I will give, Josh Pate. That's a big point of his, that he stirred up the Hornets' nest, I think, before this season on that very point. And while that may be very true, while the Jimmies and the Joes ultimately decide if Georgia Southern has a chance against Georgia or not, with this expanded field, it felt like more teams than ever, the Armies of the world, were playing the same sport as the Notre Dames. And we got to see that with real implications for the postseason. We got to see Notre Dame flex their muscle against Army and, in the Black Knight season in that manner. But if we're not talking about a 12-team expanded field playoff, that game really doesn't have a ton of relevance. And so for me, I was thankful that we got to watch just a bunch of unique storylines this year. And I certainly think that's going to continue going forward.
Yeah, Mitch, on your point about Ohio State, I like that, talking about making sure the good teams, are going to be in the playoff and allowed to compete for a championship. I guess on the flip side of that, and you can consider this a little bit of a hot take here, but Ohio State was the most talented team in the country and probably one of the most talented teams of all time, but they only had to play like it for 4 games.
Yeah, that's really true. I mean, we talked about like after that Nebraska game earlier this year. I mean, that was they looked awful after that game. During that game, they were awful. And then, of course, obviously the way they played against Michigan at the end of the year. And I know you're going to have a lot of college football like purists, and I mean, we consider ourselves like traditionalists too. We love that we've been watching, all three of us here have been watching this sport for a long time. We love this thing. That's why we do a podcast, for Christ's sake. I mean, we love it. But there's a lot of people that still want the regular season, like the game against Michigan, for example, for Ohio State. A lot of people want that game to mean what it should have meant before the 12-team playoff, which is, I mean, let's just call it what it is. We're not saying that Ryan Day should have lost his job or anything, but like if Ohio State loses that game and loses to Michigan for the fourth year in a row and doesn't make the playoff with this talented team and gets eliminated, he's probably either he steps down himself or he's probably gone. Like that's what that game could have meant if we don't have a 12-team playoff. So like Tyler put out a video the other day that said, did the 12-team playoff save Ryan Day's job? And
Yep.
It absolutely did. Absolutely it did.
I agree. And, you know, that is an element of the game that we do lose with this, right? The finality of those upsets. I made the point the other day, we don't have the Michigans over Ohio States. We don't have the Pitts ending West Virginia's season on a fluky night in Morgantown, right?
Yep.
So those kind of historic upsets maybe lose a little bit of their luster, but for me, that doesn't decrease or detract away from the entertainment value. Does it take away from, you know, Michigan's ability to say, hey, we got Ryan Day fired? Yeah, it does, right? And at that point, I'll concede all day long. But for me, I think I get the entertainment of watching Michigan, and then in the post game, we get to go over the thought experiment of, okay, Ohio State's now going to miss the Big Ten championship, but they're going to sneak into the playoff. Does this $20 million roster have enough chutzpah to turn it around, figure it out, and go win a national championship, right? So, you know, pros and cons to both sides. Entertainment level, though, which I'm so surprised that people have been saying they've been disinterested. And I think it's a small minority that have said that throughout the playoffs. But, boy, I couldn't have been more thrilled with the product that we got.
I'm with you.
I've got some thoughts on that. Let's jump into that, because let's talk about the ratings for the national championship. Let's talk about the viewership for the bowl games, which is actually up this year. Kind of the schedule of the playoffs, what needs to be fixed, how it needs to be fixed, what needs to be tweaked. Mitch, give us some ideas on how to fix this thing.
First and foremost, we got to move the season up, right? I think that's the clearest situation. The fact, I think we both put out a tweet basically at the exact same time, reacting to the January 25th announcement for 2027. So the championship of the 2026 season will be in Vegas January 25th. That is asinine to me. Even as a diehard who can find any reason to root for 100+ teams on any given Saturday, guys, I was burned out by the time we got to the national championship. I mean, the content grind had worn me out. And to think we have to go another week still coming up, it makes me cringe a little bit. And, you know, I know, you know, you guys probably felt this a little bit too. Like, there was a time that if I didn't have to get on and record a live show following the national championship game, I might have been tempted to turn it off at the half, right? When Ohio State just looked like they were blowing Notre Dame out, there was definitely a part of me that thought, oh my gosh, just let it be over. And so, I think the common suggestion is just move the season up. This is supposed to be a fall semester sport with college athletes who still have to go to class. We've got a portal window that's now going to be restricted down to 10 days. Let's see if we can get everything in before the portal window, in around New Year's Day, when excitement for a national championship game and tradition will still be at an all-time high. It feels like the season will crescendo at that time, as opposed to knocking on the door of spring training and forcing us all to wait till January 25th before we get to end this thing.
Yeah, that season looks like it would have been, just looking at the calendar, it would have been a prime spot to maybe think about moving it up a couple weeks, because Labor Day is on September 7th that year. So, and they're very obsessed with starting their, season week 1 on Labor Day. So it will start technically 5 days later on September 5th. And it did this year, August 31st, which is why, the calendar switch and everything. But I'm with you. Move the season up. I know you'll get a little more, I went to that A&M game down in week 1. and it was hot. It was hot at 7:30 or 6:30 Central at night. You get games down like that day. They were playing in Gainesville, in Miami and Florida, and it was hot. So you're going to get some of that if you move it up, a little sooner into August. But I think the payoff is worth it. And so I think that would be step one. Step two, kind of on the rating side of it, you got to move the championship game from a Monday night. Because listen, we're going to watch the game regardless. Casuals, for the most part, may watch the game. I think some of the casuals' disinterest in college football playoff, all that, probably has something to do with NIL. I've talked to the people that I work with, and they say just the NIL situation and the fact that you don't have, a guy who, commits to your school and he's there for 3 or 4 years. You can basically just buy your team. You can hire, mercenaries to come and win games for you for 1 year, and then they transfer somewhere else. It's taken some of the interest out from just like the common fan. To me, that still doesn't explain such a drastic 100 million person gap difference from the Super Bowl getting 120 million people to watch on a Sunday night versus 22 million people watching two of the biggest brands in college football, Ohio State and Notre Dame. I just think, there's got to be something else said for that gap there. What do you think it is, Lance?
Well, I definitely think it's obviously this past year. I mean, it being in 2 months after the regular season ends that's ridiculous. Like, the game is 2 months after the regular season ends. There's so many fans of college football that are kind of like almost checked out because all their team's not in this 12-team playoff already. So you might lose some of those fans, but 2 months later, I mean, come on. And the other part of this, I agree with Mitch 1,000%. And Tyler and I, we've talked about it too, moving the season up a little bit into August. But we hear a lot of talk about this. I'm just curious what y'all's thoughts are. Are they getting rid of conference championship games? Is that coming?
It seems like they would be more willing to sacrifice a conference championship game, which, let's be honest, does not mean what it used to.
Yep.
Especially with the expanded field, right? There might be more cons now to playing in a conference championship game and potentially risking sliding out of the field than winning a conference championship anyway. Ohio State didn't even have to play in a conference championship game. They got healthy and they got to go on a national championship run. So I do think that's probably the first thing that gets cut from a traditionalist's standpoint. That's going to hurt. I love conference championship week. I enjoy watching it, but it feels like that's probably what they're going to chop rather than go earlier in the season.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think that's probably coming. Everybody's talking about that. They think that that's possibly coming. That's also kind of one of the reasons why that when I saw the date for that, whatever, January 25th of 2027, that's the first year that this new contract, the contract they've got right now, that it'll expire, and that'll be the new year of the new playoff. And there are rumors of 14 teams. There's rumors of 16 teams. There's rumors of the no more conference championship game, but having the third and fourth or whatever teams from each conference play each other to try to see who gets into the playoff, like things like that going on. So that could be the reason why it's pushed back even further. But let's just be real. New Year's Day is and always has been college football's day. And I don't know how you move the calendar enough to get the national championship game on New Year's Day, but worst case scenario, they could easily have the semifinals. They could have the semis on New Year's Day, and then the following week or 10 days later, however they want to do it, have the national championship. They could do that. There's actually not a ton that needs to happen for them to accomplish that. Like, moving the regular season up like a week or two or something is really all they would need to do. This past year, we had 2 bye weeks and stuff in the regular season. So that is absolutely doable. It's one of those deals, I think Tyler said this, a couple of weeks ago, is that maybe they need to fall flat on their face. Maybe it needs to get worse. Maybe it needs to get much worse before they actually do something about it in regards to that. Because me personally, I don't really care about ratings. I'm going to watch it anyway. But I agree with you, man. That couple of days before that national championship game, we were kind of the same way. I mean, Tyler's squad was in the national championship, so it's obviously different for
Right.
him. But for me, even for me, just a diehard, like eat, breathe, and sleep college football fan, even I was like, dude, can we freaking get this game? Can we play this game already? Good.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
they just last year they just had the semis on New Year's Day, so it's definitely doable. I know they
Yeah.
added some extra teams, but I hesitate to even bring this up. But there's been a lot of talk. It feels heresy even thinking about it, but there's been a lot of talk about the Army Navy game and what should be done with the Army Navy game. And on one side, you have, let's put Army Navy week 0. It'll still have its, standalone game. You can play it wherever you want. It'll get all the eyeballs on it. On the other side, you got that it's America's game. It's more important than football. You got to play it still in a standalone at the end of the season. But there could have been a situation this year where Army gets into the playoff and they're announced in the playoff, and then they go lose to Navy afterwards. Like, you got to play it, I think, at least before the college football playoff is revealed in some cases. So, Mitch, what do you think we do with that game, if anything?
Yeah, that's a true rock and a hard place. Listen, I consider myself a patriot. I fight back tears at a good old sporting event when Old Glory's unveiled, and we sing the national anthem for sure. But I don't know that it's somehow disrespectful to the troops and to the families and the country if we don't have that game in December. I feel like it could be moved to the beginning of the year if you want it to be a standalone game, which I think it should be. Sure, that's great, but let's get it to a place where it fits naturally, especially, Tyler, as you mentioned, especially if all of a sudden Army and Navy are going to be playing with postseason implications on the line, right? Like, we're to say that no, it has to stay there. You're honestly holding Army and Navy back from potentially doing something that we would remember for the rest of college football history. And we got dangerously close to doing it this year. So, whether Army and Navy could ever reach the college football playoff game, to me, is irrelevant. I think the very possibility of having those teams and those athletes, those student athletes, put in that position, for me, it kind of tips the scale to, let's find another day for them to play on a standalone event. Everybody can watch the Army Navy game and be just fine, but let's at least do something that makes sense for the student athletes.
Yeah.
If they played that bad boy on week 0, whatever we want to call it, like to kick off the college football season with the troops, yeah. I mean, the standalone game to kick off college football every single year with Army and Navy, I think that would be fantastic.
I'd be a puddle.
Yes, yeah, it'd seriously be incredible, and I couldn't wait to have the betting apps open to start.
Yeah, I think another thing too would be just one last thing to kind of talk on the the ratings and stuff. I think it would be wise of the NFL to come alongside college football. They have no reason to. All right, they're the NFL, they're the king. Doesn't matter to them if anybody else makes money or has success. They're having plenty of it, right? But they're the only league of the major sports leagues that pays $0 for their minor league. And I just think coming alongside college football, assisting them in a way to get more eyeballs on their sport, more eyeballs on the future players of the NFL. And to me, kind of when Lance was talking about putting the semis on New Year's Day, that's fine. And in, it runs into an issue where New Year's Day falls on whatever day. It falls on a Wednesday sometimes, right? So it kind of puts a trick into the schedule. But if New Year's Day comes on a Wednesday and then 10 days later on a Saturday, you've got wild card weekend starting up in the NFL. And on that Saturday afternoon, instead of 4:30 and 8 for the wild card games, you bump them up to 1 and 4:30, leading right into the national championship of college football Saturday night, 7:30, 8 o'clock, whatever you want to make it. I think that, and obviously we don't even need to get an ESPN, but simulcasting it on ABC would help a ton. I just think that lockstep right there with the national championship sandwiched in between 3 more games on Sunday and then a Monday night wildcard game, that would be an incredible weekend.
I just think they need to let us do this. Like let us make the schedules here. Like this sounds great. I'm all for it.
It does feel like a missed opportunity, right? I agree with you there. So yeah, let me know where to submit a job application, and let's ride.
Okay, we got this figured out. We got that figured out. Let's move on.
Cool.
Let's talk something that you guys both love dearly, and that is SEC football. Let's talk SEC football. One of my hot takes, probably the first hot take that I wrote down. This is going to shock some people, and it's going to make some people mad, and I'm okay with it. But it is my belief that SEC fans, they don't actually love the game of football. They just love the SEC. The amount of people that I saw online before that Ohio State Notre Dame game talking about, like you said earlier, they were disinterested. They're not even going to watch the game. Like, I can't fathom. Like, I told Lance, if New Mexico State was playing Hawaii in the national championship, I'd be there watching it, right, in my basement. And I just can't fathom the fact that an SEC fan who just, you look at SEC football and it is the purest of the sport, right? I mean, throughout the years, it's unbelievable. And just because there's no SEC team playing in it, I just can't imagine not watching it. And like you said, I think there were probably fewer than I'm representing, people that were saying that, but they were clearly the loudest to me.
Go ahead.
It's a good point. I honestly can't really push back on it because it's something that growing up in the SEC footprint, what now is the SEC footprint, you become very aware that the loudest fans are oftentimes the least in tune with the game, right? We all love our teams, right? Lance, you love the Tide to a fault. I love the Aggies to a fault. But what makes us different from just the average college freshman, the average 15-year grad, is when our teams are in the toilet, which for me, it's been a little bit more often than yours. I'm still going to tune in. I'm still going to watch, and I'm still going to pay attention to the larger narrative because I love college football. My identity as a football fan is not solely tied to my team's outcome, to where if my team is not playing well, the rest of the sport's dead to me. Does it make the rest of the Saturday really painful? Sure does. Absolutely does. The day that I got engaged, A&M lost in a super painful way to Ole Miss, right? I joke about the engagement being my relief from the pain that Jimbo Fisher brought me. So I experience this on a very real level. But Tyler, to your original point, because the SEC has experienced so much success, you have gotten and our massive schools with huge enrollments. When they're succeeding as a conference, you're going to have that crowd oftentimes be the loudest because we all want to be a part of a winner, right? If you go to Kentucky, you're still going to chant SEC when Alabama beats Ohio State or Notre Dame, because it makes you feel like you are in the best conference. That even though you went 5-7, well, but anybody else could go 5-7 in this conference because it's really difficult. And when that facade starts to fade away, suddenly there's not much to lean on, right? And I think you have a lot of those casuals and a lot of those fans in the margins suddenly start to go, you know what? It is a beautiful night out tonight. I'm going to go out with the wife and do something else.
Yeah, I'm going to be honest with you, Tyler. I actually agree with what you're saying there, and I can't believe that I'm admitting that. But yeah, I mean, I don't think that's like necessarily obviously represents all of them by any means, but like it does probably represent a lot, because like I know that this year more than ever, we had a lot of fans that were obviously riding the SEC pretty hard during the playoff time, and I mean, a lot of people, even to us in our comments and on our YouTube channel and on some of our posts, were saying that, and you've even said this, that kind of like what Mitch just alluded to, that what drives people outside of the SEC crazy is the feeling of conference superiority when you're 4-8 Mississippi State or 5-7, like you said, Kentucky, and poking your chest out chanting SEC when Georgia and Alabama are the ones carrying the water for everybody. Like that's what drives people outside the SEC crazy. But to Mitch's point, I mean, it's literally a religion down there in the deep South for college football. It's just it really is. And I don't necessarily disagree with you, man. I definitely have a lot of friends that could care less about football being played outside of the Southeastern footprint, outside of the SEC footprint. And to Mitch's point, like, we care about it a ton, but it definitely is. It's a sense of pride deal that is absolutely, positively unmatched. It just is.
Tyler, let me turn it around back to you if I can. Up in the Midwest, rooting for Notre Dame and obviously having a number of successful schools up there, Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, etc. What is the fan base like on an average year up there? Where, I married into an Iowa family. They love their Hawks, but they know that a national championship or that elite level is probably not within reach, but they still like college football. So what is your experience with a non-SEC crowd?
Yeah, I think for me personally, growing up as a Notre Dame fan, I've never been affiliated with a conference at all.
Sure,
And that's one of the things that drives me absolutely insane is like, my conference is better than your conference. Like, I've told Lance that for as long as I know him. Like, I don't understand that. It goes beyond the Mississippi States and the Kentuckys, puffing out their chests. It's just like, who cares? And the conferences are so big these days and so spread out. It's like, who cares if Washington is better than Ole Miss or whatever? It's like, you're not even playing the same sport in the same conferences sometimes. Like, Texas playing the same schedule as Florida in the SEC, not happening. So growing up as a independent fan, right? It's just that mindset was never my mindset. Now, I've got a lot of friends here who are Purdue football fans, Indiana football fans, here in, even my neighborhood. I got some Ohio State fans and stuff. And I don't know if maybe because it gets colder up here sooner and we got to stay inside more and watch more football. Maybe they just do watch more football. And down in the South, like you said, like, I don't care about any of the games. I'm going to go out to dinner. I'm going to go out with some friends or whatever. But I think that you got your Michigans, your Ohio States, your Penn States. And when you're good, your Wisconsins. Like, I think that they do. I can't really speak, on their behalf. But I just think it's, for me personally, it's a different mindset with the whole conference thing. And I guess I just grew up, loving college football as a whole and watching it as much as I could. And obviously now, being older and married and 2 kids, like, my wife is gracious enough that she lets me watch as much college football as I can right now. So, it's going to sound like I'm, with this next one, like I'm banging on the SEC, and this is my last one really, but I really wish your boy Trey was here because I agree with him on his thoughts on Greg Sankey being the most overrated commissioner in college football. You guys are talking about, you can refresh everybody's memory, and if you haven't listened, go listen, but they're talking about Tony Petitti and how Kevin Warren leaving the Big Ten might have been the best thing to ever happen to the Big Ten, and Tony Petitti coming in and, kind of pseudo battling, Greg Sankey. And obviously this season with them getting only 3 teams in and then the bowl performances, like, it did no favors for Greg Sankey. And I think, in my opinion, you got a couple more seasons like that out of the SEC, a lot of his supposed power that he has over the game of college football is going to wash away a little bit. He'll still have that ESPN, ABC contract and everything, and all the ratings. But I just think, like, the so-called dominance of the SEC, right? I mean, his dominance, as it's seen as the commissioner of the SEC, is kind of fading away too.
Yeah, I think where Greg Sankey probably made a misstep was when he added Texas and Oklahoma to the conference. He assumed that he had all the Infinity Stones at that point, right? Who knows what the actual conversations were about adding Notre Dame, adding Florida State, Clemson, Miami, what have you. I wasn't in the room for those. Who knows if he was actually serious about getting those deals over the line. But when Texas and Oklahoma came in, I think he actually looked at the rest of the landscape of college athletics, not just football, which he's the commissioner of the Southeastern Conference. It's his job to look at all the sports. But when we know that football drives the revenue, he had a chance to step on the throats of every other conference and say the SEC is going to be the most dominant conference for as long as we have this current model, right? And he missed that opportunity. And so as the Big Ten has now added Oregon and Washington and USC and UCLA, and continues to stoke those fires that they might be open to adding another school or another two schools. For me, you add in now this year where it felt like the conference as a whole performed down a rung. And suddenly the big bad SEC is not impenetrable. They're mortal. And so I don't necessarily know that the SEC is going to slip and see their performance reduced drastically over the next couple of years. Although I do have my concerns about a program like Georgia. I don't know that Georgia is just as ironclad a championship contender every single year as maybe we've thought. And that's a whole separate can of worms. But Sankey, it felt like maybe rested on his laurels just a little bit. And he's also played favorites behind the scenes. Texas got a much more preferential treatment even to Oklahoma. And that has made a lot of folks in the conference outside of just College Station rather unpleased with him. So all of that goes hand in hand with the performance suffering just a little bit. Maybe if Georgia and Alabama and Texas and Oklahoma were the Final Four teams, we're not having this discussion, and Greg Sankey's a dang genius. But it does feel like maybe folks are starting to go, you know what? Maybe you're not as great as we thought.
So let's just keep going here with little hot takes here. We're talking about the SEC, talking about Greg Sankey. Tyler, I'm going to shock the world here with this one. I still believe the SEC is the best conference in college football. And even though there seems to be a lot of people that don't believe that, I just don't think that 1 year of, I know Michigan won the national championship last year. I'm fully aware of that. But I'm just obviously overall this postseason and this playoff deal, I am of the belief that you should not, judge conferences and decide who gets conference superiority because of bowl games, especially now. When there's so many players not playing in these games and coaches are moving between different programs or leaving, getting fired, etc. But still a lot of people do use that as a barometer to try to decide who the best conferences are. But I just think that after 1 year where, to Mitch's point, obviously the SEC definitely showed a lot of cracks in the armor this year. Definitely did not seem to be not seeing, they just weren't. They weren't as dominant as they normally are. The talent, because of the transfer portal and NIL, and seems to be more dispersed across college football, no doubt. But I still think that as of right now, today, as we sit here and record this episode right now, that the SEC still is the best conference in college football, and it takes more than just this one postseason to trump that and to make that not be the case.
Just a scorching hot take there from Lance Tartan. No, I'm with you. I mean, you on the surface, yeah, talent, probably the depth of the conference too. I mean, coaching, it's all there. And yeah, you're right. I mean, 1-2 years, it doesn't really make a dent into what they've accomplished over the past couple of decades. So I'm with you, Mitch. You still think the SEC is the most dominant conference in college football?
I do. I think the margin has gotten tighter, though, right? I mean, we live in a society that is totally predicated on what have you done for me now, right? Their sole information source is 60-second TikToks. But if we're going to forget all of these SEC championships and national championships over the last decade plus, and just distill it down to 1 year, I still think, like Lance is saying, the SEC in general, top to bottom, still stacks up really well. Now, you have maybe some recruiting cycles that start to miss, right? Georgia can't fix the offensive line. A couple quarterbacks. I mean, the quarterback play in the conference this year was terrible. So you keep having that, and maybe now we're starting to have a conversation about the Big Ten drawing level or even threatening to surpass the SEC as a whole.
Yeah. Lance, we've talked enough. Let's let our esteemed guest here give us some of his thoughts on 2024 and if he has any hot takes.
Well, I kind of teased the one scorcher that I had, which is I'm very worried about Georgia going into 2025 and beyond. And it's not just because the offensive line was leaky this year or they couldn't run the football. I'm really concerned about Kirby Smart and the culture that he has at Georgia. It felt like concentration was at an all-time low in Athens this year, and the low-hanging fruit is obviously all of the arrests and the car wrecks and everything that's gone on with Athens PD. That's got to get cleaned up yesterday. I can't believe that that's still an issue for a program like the University of Georgia. But to see the physicality was not on display against Notre Dame. I mean, Notre Dame was whipping the dogs up front in the line of scrimmage, which is something that an SEC team is supposed to win, 7 days to Sunday. And that's not what we saw.
Especially Kirby Smart's teams.
Yes. Yeah, there's that grit, that nastiness. And I was watching snaps where Notre Dame was an injured Notre Dame line, whether it was offensive or defensive line, was blowing Georgia off the ball. So, if there's a team that I'm really doubting heading into 2025, what can you show me in 2025? Honestly, I'll put Georgia at the top of that list.
Yeah, I think one of my big worries on Georgia, and Lance and I have talked about this, is how much longer is Kirby Smart going to do this, right? And Lance can touch on it a little bit, to kind of his thoughts, but he's obviously had interest from the NFL. And I think, just dealing with the NIL world too, he's a Saban disciple. He probably thinks a lot, the same way that Nick does. And just, dealing with the portal, dealing with these college kids, you never know when they're going to leave, what they're going to do. You never know how fast they're going to drive, all this stuff. So, how much longer, Lance, does Kirby stick around, you think?
Yeah, Mitch, I actually told Tyler off air, but I guess I'm going to air it out here now on this. But I told him this was after the regular season, after the SEC championship game. They just won the SEC championship. We were at the Big Ten championship together there in Indy, and we were just riding back after that game to his house. And I was telling him, and I said, man, I'm going to be honest with you. Like, I don't know that Kirby Smart's still going to be coaching at Georgia 3 to 5 years from now. Someone that I thought was going to be there for a long time. Now, I'm not necessarily saying he's going somewhere else in college football. I'm just meaning that we've seen it in college basketball where some of these legends are leaving and they all cite, all the changing and just this lack of uniformity across the sport. And it's just the wild, wild west. And like Kirby Smart is, again, he's cut from the same cloth as Nick Saban. I mean, this guy is just an absolute psycho in his craft and how he goes about his business with recruiting. I mean, recruiting is the lifeblood of his program. Everybody knows that. And I mean, for him to not have the ability to still go and recruit the best players in all of college football to come play football for him in Athens, to build his program up to where he's got tons of depth and he's coaching these guys up and they're waiting their turn. And, you saw the Eagles on the Eagles defense has multiple Georgia guys in the NFL. And you see some of these Georgia guys all over the NFL that you've been watching these NFL playoffs. I just can't imagine that he's going to continue to stick around if this continues going forward. What you're talking about, if he can't get the same guys and, he's got a guy that he's been recruiting for 2 or 3 years, building that relationship with. I mean, he's the best recruiter in college football. After Nick Saban left, he's the best. And for him to build all these relationships and have all these relationships with these kids and these players and these high school coaches all over the country, to just when it comes to National Signing Day that someone happens to drop a bigger bag than what they dropped to bring him in, or he does bring him in, even worse. He does bring him in, all that work and all that hard work to get these kids to come to Athens. And then after year one, they may not play as much as they want to, and they just go somewhere else. I know that everybody is dealing with the same thing. I get that. But I just think that is the lifeblood of what his culture and his program has been up to this point at Georgia. And that's in jeopardy now. And he's going to have to go about it a different way.
I don't know if it's as far-fetched as what we're thinking. I mean, he's already been there for 9 seasons, and we're talking 3 to 5 more. That puts him at 12 to 14 years at one school, which if you're thinking about it, Dabo has been at Clemson for a long time, right? But we had a crazy amount of turnover last offseason in the college football coaching ranks. And the year before that, you had Brian Kelly, who you would have thought would have been a lifetime contract at Notre Dame, and he'd been there for 12 years or so, and he leaves. So for him being, at Georgia for 9 seasons already, it's not necessarily as far-fetched as we think for him to leave, after 12 seasons.
Yeah, if he's got an itch that he wants to scratch at all to go to the NFL, like I think that would be sometime in the next couple of years. Like if he's going to go that route, I think that's going to be sometime in the next couple of years. But he might not. He might just want to, might just want to retire. But yeah, I just aired that out here. But that's something that I've been thinking about. I've been talking to Tyler about it multiple times this year. I just think that guy is too addicted to his craft and the way he does it and the way he does his process there in Athens, and like he just can't do that same process anymore. And I think he knows that. But I mean, again, who knows? They may go out and win the national championship this coming up year in 2025. But I agree with you, Mitch, that if there is more questions in Athens right now than there has been his entire time that he's been there, no doubt about it.
I think the only long-term solution, and I hate that I'm about to say this, I think the only long-term solution to the Kirby Smarts of the world, the Nick Sabans retiring, right? You mentioned all the college basketball coaches that, like Jim Larinaga, just ups and leaves, right? Just, sorry, yep. I'm not, Jay Wright, just a couple weeks before the season. Yep. Sorry, not really into it anymore.
Tony Bennett.
We've got to go away from the NCAA, and unfortunately, I think the only way forward for any sort of sustainable future for the game that we love is a national college football league. And I hate it. I absolutely hate it. But the evidence is stacking up more and more to where, like, Kirby's a man, right? Kirby, as great as he is, as legendary as he is, he's a human that runs out of gas and at a certain point has a breaking point and just doesn't want to do it anymore. Yeah. And I think we're approaching that with to be as great as Kirby Smart is, it takes going past your breaking point. And when they can't even go further than that just to stay relevant and to stay at that championship level, you're at an unsustainable point for the sport in general.
Yep. Agree 1,000%.
All right, I'm giving last call on hot takes.
I think I've aired what I came to say on this, and you guys have been gracious enough to allow me to air that. So I think I'm going to retire for tonight.
Lance?
No, I'm good, man.
Any more SEC talk?
No, I had. Well, I got one more. It's not SEC. Though.
I knew it. I knew he had one more.
I got one more. It's not SEC though. Like, and we're not the hot seat. I don't think you guys either are.
No.
You're not either. We're not the hot seat. But like something that I saw someone talking about today. I think Tyler, you may have been like back and forth with someone on X today about it. But this is way out in left field, completely away from SEC country. But what about Luke Fickell in Wisconsin this year going into 2025? Like that is a program that has, for as long as I can remember, had sustained success, did things a certain way, played football a certain way, had a great brand about them, and they won at a very high level. And it's not working there right now. Like, how much longer do they give him at Wisconsin?
Tyler, I mean, you're closer to that than I am. It feels like, to me, the ice is extremely thin. I think the key indicator is his quarterbacks. His quarterbacks have all been from the state of Texas, from my neck of the woods. I've covered like half of his quarterback recruits. I've been in the press box or, calling their play-by-play. And the fact that they're willing to just up and leave. Maybe Medauer left right after Phil Longo took the job at Sam Houston State. He commits to the Bearcats in Conroe. Braden Locke, a 4-star out of Rockwall here in my neck of the woods in North Texas, commits to Sam Houston State. The fact that this dairy raid concept has fallen so far in its face, I think has probably dug Fickell a hole that he's not going to be able to get out of, because unfortunately Wisconsin's defense they're not kind of at that legendary level, even that I think they would have been at had they retained Jim Leonhard, right? I was rooting for Leonhard to take that job the whole time. I felt
Yeah.
crushed for the guy that he didn't get that opportunity. And it kind of feels like football karma might be biting the Badgers just a little bit.
Yeah, it was our guys over at Walk On. They put out, just a screenshot of Wisconsin's schedule and what it looked like. And if you look at it on its, I mean, they have a couple of, MAC schools, Sunbelt schools, but they got to go to Alabama. They got to go to Bryant Denny this year. They got to go to Michigan. They get Ohio State at home. They got to go to Oregon.
Yikes.
They got to go to Indiana, and they got to go to Minnesota. They get Washington and Illinois at home. It's one of the toughest slates in the Big Ten. And my initial thought was, another 5-7 season could be on the brink. And, it was Jake over there who said, okay, how hot is this seat? And it's just another 5-7 season. I can't see Luke Fickell surviving that. He's probably looking back and maybe thinking, shoot, Cincinnati going to the Big 12 might have been a better, safer place to stay. But you just no way of knowing those things. And maybe they get it turned around. Maybe they get it fixed this year, and maybe they have success. And I think a 7-win season in a bowl game shows progress up there. So it's but that's looking at it. Here in January, that's one of the toughest conference schedules in the Big Ten right now.
It's no on-ramp to success there, right? Like you said, maybe there's an Arizona State waiting to happen up there in Camp Randall. But boy, where we sit, start of the new year here, it's not looking good. And I hate that for Fickell. Obviously, he did a great job at Cincinnati, but another testament to the grass isn't always greener, I guess.
Yeah. All right, let's leave it there. Let's leave it at Wisconsin. Let's put 2024 in the books. Like I always say, man, as Bill Belichick says, we're on to 2025. Next season is going to be a great one. We'll be here to cover it. 3Tech will be there to cover it. Make sure you go follow those guys on X at 3Tech Pod. Look them up on Spotify, Apple, YouTube. They're putting out some great content, great stuff. Mitch, Trey, Garrett, they all do a really good job. Mitch, can't thank you enough for hopping on with us tonight. Here in the off season, let's do it again. Let's hop on your show. Let's just the more podcasts, the merrier.
Let's do it, guys. This has been a blast, and can't wait to do it again.
Thanks, Mitch. Enjoyed it, man.